A booth at the county fair that takes more than tickets. A swimming hole where no child goes past the second tree. A town that empties completely 1 week every August for no apparent reason. 3 people in Hollow County pushed the rules. Welcome to Echoes in the Dark. My name is Ryan Mercer, and I grew up in Ash Fork in Hollow County. It seemed like a wonderful place to grow up, right up until the third night of the county fair, when I watched a woman I'd known my whole life hand her family through a hole in a plywood wall. I was 17. I'm 34 now. A man gave up everything for me that summer. I watched him do it. I was told to say I didn't remember, and I've said it for 17 years, to everyone, including my wife. But I haven't forgotten. The Ash Fork County Fair ran the second and third weeks of July. Always. Same hayfield behind the Grange Hall back to 1911. 400 people in that town, one blinking light at the crossroads, and for 2 weeks in July, that field had more people on it than the town had residents. Working it was a rite of passage. The summer I turned 17, I got hired on with my friend Cody, and we got the orientation standing in the grass from a woman named Delia, who ran the ticket office and had run it since my father's time. 9 minutes, clipboard, no ceremony. Where to clock in. Don't take cash for rides. Don't let on anybody obviously drunk. Then, at the end, in the same flat voice, the midway lights stay on until the last person is off the grounds. All of them. Until the lot's empty and the gate is shut. And the booth at the far end of the midway takes tickets. You don't work it. You don't cover it if it looks like nobody's there. You don't ask about it. Somebody asked why. Delia looked at him a second and said, "Because that's how it's run." Then clicked her pen and asked if anybody needed a shirt in a large. Everybody in Ash Fork knew the story. It wasn't a secret. It was a bit. Cody told it to me that first night, sitting on the tailgate of his truck in the employee lot, in the exact tone you'd use for a campfire story you'd heard 40 times. 1963. The Grange Hall was getting re-roofed, and they moved the fair back a week, and 4 kids died on the scrambler. Ride was working fine. Inspector came out and couldn't find a thing wrong with it, and that same summer, 5 more kids in that same class all quit their college plans inside a fortnight and never left town. Not one of them. Not ever. And that's why they never moved the fair, Cody said, and did the voice, the spooky narrator voice, waggling his fingers. The fair takes its due. I laughed. Of course I laughed. That story was 100% as real to me as the wildcat that supposedly lived behind the quarry. Every small town has one. Ours had a fair that ate people, and old men at the diner who'd tell you about it with a straight face, and a good third of the town that half believed it, and another third that thought the first third were idiots, and everybody in the middle who just liked telling it. I loved it too. It's a good story. I told it to a girl from Cutchin that same week to watch her face. Night 3 I was working trash, which is the worst job and the one they give you first. About 11:15 I was dragging bags up the row past the far booth. Somebody was at the window. That was already odd. 3 days in, I hadn't seen one person at that booth. It was a woman in a church dress with her back to me, and there was a box at her feet. A file box, the cardboard kind with the lid off. I stopped because I was 17 and it was strange and there was nothing else happening. She took something out of the box and put it through the slot. I couldn't see what it was at first. As I focused, I could see that it was a ring. She held it a second and then fed it through, and I heard it go. That small sound a thing makes falling into a space bigger than you'd expect. Then letters. A bundle of them, tied with a ribbon. And she didn't put the bundle through. She untied it and put them in one at a time, maybe 40 of them, and it took a long while, and her shoulders were shaking like she was crying. Then she stood up and lifted out a folded flag. A burial flag. The triangle, the kind they hand a mother at a graveside. I knew whose it was, because everybody in Ash Fork knew whose it was. Her son had been killed overseas about 10 years before, and there was a photograph of him on the wall at the VFW. She put a folded burial flag through a 2-inch ticket slot. That slot was a slot. It was cut for tickets. And that flag went through it without unfolding, without catching, without changing shape at all. It just went in, the way water goes down a drain, and it did not come out the other side of the plywood, because I could see the other side of the plywood, and there was nothing behind that booth but grass. That was the moment I stopped being a kid who thought the fair story was funny. Then there was one thing left in the box. It was an urn. Dark, about the size of a bread loaf, and she picked it up and held it in both hands against her chest, and she stood there. She stood there a long time, longer than everything else combined. Long enough that I set my bags down. And then she put it through. She straightened up. And then she was young. This was not a trick of light. I was 30 feet away with a work light behind me. Ruth Halloran was 62 years old, and she taught Sunday school when I was 8, and I had seen her at the grocery the week before, and she was healthy. She walked to the post office every day, she drove herself everywhere, she still taught the 3rd grade class. And for about 10 seconds she was a woman of 30, standing in the same dress which now hung wrong on her. Dark hair, her back straight, her hands, I could see her hands, smooth. And she made a sound I have not been able to get out of my head in 17 years, which was a small, delighted, absolutely genuine laugh. The kind you make when somebody's kept a promise. She got what she came for. She got it, and she knew she'd gotten it. And then it was taken from her. It didn't reverse. It didn't run backward like film. It came off her the way a coat comes off, all at once, pulled. And for a moment, maybe a second, what was standing there in that church dress was not a young woman, and was not an old woman. It was thin. It was thin in a way that isn't about weight. Whatever a person has in them that makes them someone, that makes a room feel occupied when they walk into it, that was gone. And what was left was standing up on its own out of habit. Her face was slack, her eyes were open, and there was nothing behind them. And it lasted about as long as a blink, and I have thought about it every week of my adult life. Then she was 62 again, and she went down on the grass like her strings had been cut. I screamed for help. People came fast. There were 200 people on that midway. Somebody's husband was a paramedic, and he had her flat and was working on her inside a minute, and the county ambulance came across the field with the lights going, and they took her out through the gate. Delia got to us maybe 30 seconds in. And Delia, who I would later understand was carrying more than anybody on that field, Delia did not look at Ruth Halloran. She looked at the booth. Then she got hold of my arm and moved me up the midway toward the lights, walking fast, saying something about giving them room, and she did not let go of me until we were at the ticket office. The box was gone. I went back and looked the next morning, in daylight, and there was no box, and no urn, and no flag, and no 40 letters in the grass. There was a flattened patch where a cardboard box had been sitting. Ruth died the next night, in the hospital in Cutchin, without waking up. The paper said, heat stroke. It was 71 degrees that night. There was a breeze off the ridge. She was a healthy 62-year-old woman in a cotton dress who had walked maybe 200 yards from a parking lot. I was in long sleeves and I was comfortable. Heat stroke. Adults told me it was awful. They told me she'd been under a lot of strain. They told me the heat gets people at that age, even when it doesn't feel hot. And every one of them moved the conversation somewhere else so smoothly that I didn't notice it happening until the 3rd or 4th time. Nobody lied to me. That's what I've come around to. I don't think one person in Ashfort lied to me about Ruth Halloran. They just, all of them, had somewhere else for the conversation to be. I told Cody. That same night, in his truck, in the church parking lot where we always parked. I told him all of it. The box, the ring, the letters, the flag going through the slot, the 10 seconds where she was 30 years old, the thing that wasn't her. And Cody believed me. He believed me instantly, and that was the worst part, because Cody was the one who'd told me the story on a tailgate 3 nights before, doing a spooky voice with his fingers. He listened to about 40 seconds of it, and then he said, "Stop. Stop talking." And when I didn't, he got out of the truck. He got out of his own truck and stood in the parking lot with his back to me and his hands on top of his head, like a man who'd just seen a wreck. And he stayed like that a while. And when he got back in, he was somebody different than the kid who'd gotten out. He said, "Don't tell anybody else that." I said, "Cody, it's the story. It's your story. You told it to me." And Cody said, "It's not a story if you say it like that." That's the sentence. Out of everything anybody said to me that summer, that's the one I've kept. It's not a story if you say it like that. He wasn't calling me a liar. He was telling me the rules. That Ash Fork could hold that thing as long as everybody agreed to hold it a certain way. And I had just picked it up wrong, and he was scared of what I was doing with it. It started pulling at me about 2 days after she died. Nothing spoke to me. I never heard a voice. There was no whisper in the dark, no compulsion, nothing that felt like anything other than my own mind. I started wanting to go down there. That's the whole thing. I would be standing at the gate taking tickets, and I'd come back to myself and realize I'd been looking down the dark end of the midway for I don't know how long. I'd be doing my job, and I'd find I'd drifted 40 feet off my post in the general direction of the last game. Once, on a break, I got all the way to the edge of where the lights gave out before I registered that I'd stood up and started walking. And it didn't feel like being made to do anything. It felt like an idea I'd had. It felt like curiosity, the ordinary kind, except that it never went away, and it got a little stronger every day, and I could not, when I sat down and honestly asked myself, produce a single reason why I wanted to go and look at a plywood shack in the dark. By the second week, it was most of what was in my head. I'd lie in bed at home, 3 miles from that field, and think about the light being on in it. That's what I mean when I say the fair noticed me. It didn't chase me. It made me want to come. The other thing was the schedule. Delia posted shifts on a clipboard by the ticket office, handwritten, and starting about the 4th day, mine kept coming up wrong. She'd write me on the gate. I'd go look, and it would say the far end, the last 4 dames, past the zipper. She'd fix it. Next day, same thing. She fixed it 4 times that I know of, and after the 3rd one, she stopped saying anything about it and just fixed it, with her mouth, in a line, in front of me. The 5th time she took the clipboard off the nail and carried it away with her, and I didn't see it again for the rest of the fair. She read the shifts out loud after that, every morning, off a piece of paper she kept in her apron. The warning came from Marcus. Marcus was traveling crew, 25 or so, from nowhere in particular, with the flat competence of a man who'd worked 40 of these. We'd barely spoken. On the 9th or 10th day, he came and found me at the end of a shift, which I noticed, because the traveling crew did not seek out local kids. He said, "You're asking around about the Halloran woman." I said yes. And he said, "Don't. I'm not being cute with you. I was a kid like you at a fair like this, and I asked around and I poked at it, and it noticed me. And now I'm 25 years old, and I have been 25 years old for a while, and I go where the trucks go. That's what's down the other end of what you're doing. Not dying. This." And then he stopped. I watched a grown man hear his own voice and go white. I have never seen anybody's face change that fast. He looked past me, not at me, past me, down the midway toward the dark end, the way you'd look at a door you'd just realized was open. And he laughed. It was a terrible laugh. Way too late and way too loud. And he said, "God, listen to me. Long shifts. That's all that is. Long shifts and no sleep." And he clapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Forget it. Ask Delia for gate." And he walked off fast. He was frightened of having said it out loud, where the fair could hear him. Closing night, 2nd Saturday, Derby night, the whole county out, the lot overflowing. At 9:40, the lights went out on the far third of the midway. The last 4 games, the booth, everything past the zipper. Not all at once, that's what I remember. They went out in order, far end first, then the next section, then the next. 3 of them, about a second and a half apart, coming up the row toward me. Like something walking and putting them out as it came. The crowd barely noticed. Most of the midway was still lit. The staff moved. Delia came out of the ticket office at a speed I did not know a woman her age had and went for the gate. The gate. The exit, not the outage. Two of the traveling crew ran flat out for the generator shed. Marcus went past me at a dead sprint toward the parking lot with a radio in his hand and did not look at me once. And Bill left the scrambler. I should tell you about Bill. He ran that ride and had run it forever. 60, maybe 70. Weathered past the point where you can read an age off a man. Quiet, kind, knew every local kid's name by the second day, which the traveling crew never bothered to do. He'd let you ride free after close if you'd worked hard. And in 2 weeks, I had never once seen him watch his own ride. He ran it by feel, one hand on the lever, standing turned about 40 degrees away from his riders, facing the dark end of the field. 2 hours at a stretch. Not daydreaming. Watching. When the lights went out, Bill stopped the ride mid-cycle, let it coast down with people still in the seats hollering at him, and walked away from a loaded ride toward the dark end at a pace that wasn't a run and wasn't a walk and had nothing casual in it anywhere. He wasn't running from it. He was going to it, like a man whose shift had finally started. And I went down there. Nobody sent me. Nobody made me. I did not hear a voice. I had been wanting to go down there for 11 days by then, wanting it the way you want a cigarette, and the lights had just gone out, and something in me said, now, and it sounded exactly like my own thoughts, because I think by then it was. I got 40 feet past the last lit game and it went properly black. And the booth had its light on. The outage had taken 4 games, the string lights, the utility poles, the whole far end. And that booth? Plywood. Unmarked, no generator I ever saw, no line running to it that I ever saw, was lit from the inside. The same steady yellow it had been for 2 weeks. I stopped. There was somebody at the window, on the inside. I could see hands, both of them, flat on the counter, in the light. Ordinary hands, a man's hands, maybe 50 years old, a little sun damage across the backs, a wedding band. That's all I could ever see of him, just the hands and the counter and the yellow light. The hands turned over, palms up, and waited. There was nothing threatening in it. It was the gesture of a man at a counter who has been handed everything you have and looked through all of it and found none of it sufficient, and is now waiting, with infinite patience, for you to give him something better. Ruth Halloran had brought a ring and 40 letters and her son's burial flag and her husband's ashes. And I was standing there with nothing, and I understood, not in words, not as a thought, but in my body, the way you understand a drop when you're standing at the edge of one, that I was not there to bring something. I was the something. Then it came across the counter. Not fast, at the speed of a man reaching for a cup of coffee. Except a booth window is 4 feet across, and I was 30 feet back, and it covered all of that in the time it takes to reach for something on a table. And it had my forearm. The light was behind it, and I never got a clear look, and I have decided over the years that this was a mercy. What I got instead was feel. It closed on my arm the way a hand closes. Palm, fingers, the whole ordinary architecture of a grip. And then it kept closing. It went around my forearm, and it kept going, and it wrapped, and I felt it come all the way around and overlap itself on the other side. And there was still more of it, and the more of it went up past my elbow. And it pulled. It pulled me toward that window the way you draw a bag across a table. Steady, even, no strain in it at all. My heels came off the ground. I got my other hand on it, and what was under my fingers was warm and dry and moved wrong. And it did not react to being touched. It was not fighting me. It was collecting me, at a walking pace, and my resistance was not something it had noticed. I could see the counter coming. I could see the window, and the yellow light, and the dark part above the frame where the light didn't reach. I was maybe 8 feet from it when Bill hit me. He came in from the left at a dead run and put his shoulder into my chest and drove me sideways off my feet. The grip came off. I don't know if he broke it loose or if it simply let go. And I went down backward, and my heel caught a guy line, and my head went into the steel leg of the zipper, hard enough that I heard it. I did not lose consciousness. That's the part I was told to say I did, And I did for 17 years. I lay on my back in the grass with the world tilting and going soft at the edges, and I could see, and I saw all of it. Bill did not look at me. He got up off the ground and he did not check on me, and he did not say a word to me. And I understood even then, with my skull cracked, that he had about 9 seconds and he was spending them where they were worth the most. He walked to the booth. And about halfway there, he rolled his sleeves up, both of them, one at a time, still walking, the way a man does before he gets into something. And it was such an ordinary, workmanlike, unafraid thing to do that it has stayed with me longer than the hands did. He got to the window and put both his forearms flat on that counter, palms up, the same way it had been waiting. And he said one word, across 40 feet of grass, in a voice with nothing in it but tiredness. He said, "No." Not to me. He never once looked at me. He said it to the thing in the booth, in the flat, exhausted tone of a man closing an argument he'd been having for a very long time. And it took him. It didn't drag him. He didn't struggle. There was no violence in it at all. And that's somehow what has kept me up more nights than anything else. Because I have seen violence since, and violence is survivable in your memory, and this is not. Bill leaned in through that window like a man leaning in to hear something over a crowd. And he got smaller. Not farther away. Smaller. The way a man does when he takes his coat off, except it kept going, and it went past what a body does, and the shape of him at that window went from a man leaning in to a man's shape leaning in, to something about the width of the light coming out of it. And then the light through that window wasn't blocked by anything anymore. And Bill wasn't there. The last thing I remember is the light going out in that booth. Not the breaker. It went out the way a lamp goes out when somebody's done with the room. Then the dark came up over me. Fractured skull, a minor bleed on the brain. 3 days admitted and a lot of scans and a headache like a held note. They found Bill the next morning on the field, 20 feet from the booth, and the county listed it as a cardiac event, and he was old enough that nobody asked a second question. I've never known what to do with that. There was a body, a whole entire body, and a death certificate and a burial in the county plot with the fair paying for it. Whatever leaned into that window went somewhere, and something got left on the grass that a coroner looked at for 11 minutes and signed off on. I have never been able to decide whether that means it only took part of him or whether the part it took was the whole of him and what was left was just the container. The second afternoon, Delia came to the hospital. She brought my mother a coffee and made small talk for 10 minutes, and then my mother went down the hall for something, and Delia leaned forward and put her hand on the rail of the bed. She said, "You don't remember anything after the lights went out." I said I did. I started to say what I'd seen. And Delia said, "I know you do, honey." She didn't raise her voice or change her expression at all. "And you're going to say you don't, every time, to the sheriff, to the doctor, to your friends, to your mother, for the rest of your life." I asked her why, and she said the only thing anybody ever gave me by way of an explanation, and she said it kindly, which is what makes it unbearable. Because Bill just bought you a whole life. If you spend it telling people what you saw, they'll take it off you a different way. Go be 17. Then my mother came back and Delia asked about the parking. My father came the second night and sat a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "You went down there." Not a question. I said yes. And then I said, because I was 17 and my head hurt and I'd been holding it 2 days, "Dad, he walked into it. He put his arms on the counter and he walked into it." And my father put his face in his hands. He sat like that a while. Then he told me the same thing Delia had, in different words, and he never once said it wasn't true. He said, "You don't remember. Do you understand me? You hit your head and you don't remember." I said, "Okay." And then he said, the only thing he has ever said to me about any of it, before or since. "Somebody paid for that. Don't throw it away." I did not go near a fairground for 17 years. I had watched it take a man, and I had felt what it was like to want to walk toward it, and I was not confident that the wanting was gone. so I stayed out. And then my wife got pregnant, and something in me came loose that I'd kept nailed down since I was 17, and I got in a car. I went back to Ash Fork this July. I didn't tell my wife where I was going, which I'm not proud of. I drove 5 hours with my hands at 10 and 2 the whole way like a man taking a test. I could hear it before I was out of the car, and it turns out it sounds exactly the same. I got as far as the end of the midway. Same field, same row, and down at the far end, past the last game, the booth was there, with its light on, the way it always has been. And there was a man at the scrambler. He was running it by feel, one hand on the lever, standing turned about 40 degrees away from his own riders, facing the dark end of the field. It was Marcus. He hadn't aged a day, not one. He was exactly the man who found me at the end of a shift when I was 17 years old, and told me the truth, and then got frightened of having told me. I'm 34, and going gray at the temples, and he looked like he'd walked out of that same summer without stopping. He saw me. He glanced over, once, the way you check a sound, and there was a moment where I know he knew me, because something moved across his face, and it was not surprise. It was something closer to being caught. He didn't wave, he didn't nod. He held it about a second and a half, and then he turned back to the trees. Most people who get saved never see it happen. Somebody stands between them and something, and they go their whole lives not knowing, and the not knowing is usually a kindness. My name is Hannah Reese, and I grew up in Ash Fork, in Hollow County, swimming in a creek pool everybody called the Bend. There was one rule about that water. I learned it when I was 7, and I kept it for 31 years without ever once asking why. 4 summers ago, I broke it. The Bend wasn't a proper name. It was just what it was. The creek came down out of the hills, hit a shelf of rock, and turned hard. And where it turned, it had dug itself a pool over about 10,000 years, deep and cold and green, with a gravel beach on the inside of the curve, and a stand of sycamores on the outside leaning over the water. There was a rope swing. Of course there was. It hung from a sycamore limb about 15 feet up, and somebody's dad replaced the rope every few years, and you swung out over the deep part and let go, and that was the entire architecture of summer from the time you were 7 until the time you got a car. I learned to swim there. My mother learned to swim there. And every single one of us learned the rule the same way. The rule was, you don't swim past the second sycamore. The trees stood along the outer bank in a rough line, and everybody counted them from the gravel. First one was the swing tree. Second one was maybe 30 feet downstream. Past that, the bank got steeper and the water got darker, and the trees kept going around the curve out of sight. You could swim to the second sycamore. You could touch it. Kids did on a dare, slapping the trunk and kicking back. You did not go past it. That was the whole rule. No time of day attached, no season, no conditions. A line in the water marked by a tree, and everybody on the correct side of it. I learned it from Tara Beecham, who was 9 when I was 7, in the summer of 1994, standing in 2 feet of water on the gravel. I remember the actual moment, which I shouldn't because nothing happened. I'd been paddling in a direction, and she said, "Hey, not past the second one," and pointed, and I said, "Okay." That was it. And I carried that instruction for 3 decades. She was 9. She was not an authority on anything. She could not have told you why, and I never asked. Because when you're 7 and a 9-year-old tells you something, it's simply a fact about the world. Filed next to, "Don't eat the red berries," and "The deep end starts at the rope." Every person from Ash Fork I have ever put the question to remembers learning it from another kid. An older cousin, a sibling, somebody's friend at the beach. Not one of them learned it from a parent. Not one. I left at 19 and did the normal things. School, a job, a city, a marriage that worked. I came back for holidays and funerals, and I did not think about the Bend at all, the way you don't think about your own childhood most days. The summer I was 38, my mother had a knee replacement, and I came home for 6 weeks to get her through it. My sister was there too, with her boy Wyatt, who was 8 that year. Second week, hot afternoon, my sister sent us both down to the bend to get out of the house. I hadn't been in 20 years. It was smaller than I remembered, the way everything is. Same gravel, same sycamores. The rope had been replaced with something synthetic and blue, which offended me more than I expected. 6 or 7 kids in the water. It was good, actually. I sat on the gravel with my feet in the cold and felt about as content as I've ever felt. And then Wyatt swam out a little too far, and one of the older kids on the bank, a girl of maybe 11, whose name I never learned, who was not related to him and did not know him, called across the water, "Hey, not past the second one," and pointed. I got cold. Sitting in the sun on hot gravel in July, I got cold from the sternum outward, and my hands started shaking before I understood why. It was the phrasing. The exact phrasing. Not past the second one. Not don't go past the second tree. Not stay this side of the sycamore. The same 5 words, in the same cadence, from a different child, on the same gravel, 31 years later. And Wyatt turned around and came back without asking a single question. Because a bigger kid told him. Same as me. Tara Beecham told me in 1994. Somebody told Tara, probably around 91. Somebody told them. Back and back and back, kid to kid, in the same words, in an unbroken chain of children, for as long as there has been a rope on that tree. And not one adult anywhere in it. That's when I started asking. And that's when it stopped being a nice afternoon. I started easy. I asked my mother that night over dinner in the tone of pleasant nostalgia. "Hey, do you remember the thing about the second sycamore?" She said, "Oh, sure," and kept eating. I said, "Do you know why?" And my mother, 71, sharp as a tack, taught 4th grade for 32 years, does the crossword in pen, put her fork down and looked at a point about 2 feet left of my head and said, "That's just where you stop." I said, "I know, but why there? Is it a current? Is there a drop-off?" And she said, "I don't know. That's where you stop." And picked her fork back up, and her hand was not steady. That was my mother. And I had just watched her reach for a fact she was certain she possessed, come back with nothing, be frightened by the nothing, and cover it in about 2 seconds flat. Over the next 4 weeks, I asked 11 people. Nobody refused. There was no wall of silence, no locals clamming up, none of that. Every single person answered me pleasantly and immediately, and every single answer was different, and not one of them was a reason. The man at the hardware store said the creek bed drops off past there. My aunt said it was the current when the water's high in spring. A woman at the church supper said a boy drowned there in the 60s. A cousin of mine said there's a haint in that pool. Said it the way you'd say there's a wasp nest in that shed. Matter of fact, no drama at all. Somebody who went in and never came out and stayed. An old man at the diner told me it was a mother. That she'd lost her children in that creek before there was a town, and she never left, and she watches the ones that swim there now. He said it kindly. He said it the way you'd tell a child something true. And a woman I went to high school with, who has a shop that sells candles and crystals, told me very seriously that it was the green man, and that you leave something at a boundary and you don't cross it, and did I want to buy a book about it? Every answer was the sort of thing a person constructs on the spot when asked why they do something they've always done. Nobody had the same one. And the more I asked, the more I understood that I wasn't gathering explanations. I was watching 11 separate people manufacture one in real time, because the question had opened a hole, and something in them badly wanted it filled. That's not a town covering something up. A cover-up has a story. These people had nothing, and their nothing was uniform. I wrote all 11 down anyway. I want that noted, because 4 weeks later, one of those answers was the only reason I got out of that water. By week 3, they were frightened of me. Not angry, not defensive, scared. And specifically, scared for me, in the particular way you'd be scared watching somebody lean out over a railing. My aunt called my sister to ask if I was doing all right, if the city had been hard on me, if I was getting fixed on things. A woman I'd known my whole life put her hand on my arm outside the post office and said, "Honey, why are you asking about the creek?" And her eyes were wet. Nobody warned me off. Nobody ever said, "Stop." They just got frightened in the presence of the question, the way animals get frightened by a sound they can't place. None of the answers gave me a real reason. So I did the research properly at the county library. There is no recorded drowning at the Bend. Not one. In any county record from 1911 forward, which is as far back as it goes. For a swimming hole 400 people have used every summer for a century, that's not just unusual. Every other body of water in this county has at least one. The Bend has none. I paid a man $400 to come out on a Saturday with depth equipment, and he ran the pool from the gravel to about 200 feet downstream and wrote me a page and a half. There's no drop-off past the second sycamore. The bed shelves gently and keeps shelving. No undertow, no sink, no cold spring inlet, no submerged debris. The deepest point of the whole pool is actually upstream of the swing tree, on the side everybody swims on. He asked why I'd wanted it done, and I said, family curiosity. And he said, well, it's a nice creek, and packed up and left. And I stood on that gravel, holding a piece of paper that said the rule protects nobody from anything, which meant the rule was doing something else. I found the mails on a Thursday. I'd gone down at 7 in the morning when there was nobody there, and I waded out to the second sycamore and put my hands on it, because I had run out of records to check, and all that was left was the tree itself. About chest height on the upstream side, there's a knot in the bark, an old, healed-over swelling the size of a fist. I'd have called it a burl my whole life. And I put my thumb on the center of it and felt something hard and flat under maybe an inch of grown-over wood. Iron. A nailhead. Square cut, the kind that hasn't been made in 100 years, driven in so long ago the tree had swallowed it. There were 9 of them in that trunk. I found 4 more in the swing tree, and then I waded down to the third sycamore, 30 feet past the line, and went over every inch of it I could reach, and it was clean. No knots, no nailheads, nothing. The first tree is warded. The second tree is warded. The third one is not. That's the line. That's the entire rule. Somebody 140 years ago drove iron into 2 trees and stopped. And every child in Ash Fork since has been swimming inside a fence nobody can see and nobody remembers building. I sat on the gravel that morning and I was so pleased with myself that I laughed out loud. The flea market at the fairgrounds runs the 3rd Saturday of the month, and I went the weekend after because I was 38 years old and I had just solved a 140-year-old mystery and I was in the mood to buy something stupid. There was a man selling a coffee can of old square-cut nails for $2 a piece. Most of them were plain. One wasn't. It was longer than the others, 5 inches maybe, and heavier. And somebody had worked the shank. 6 shallow marks cut into the iron, evenly spaced. Not letters in any alphabet I know, but not random either. Deliberate. The kind of marks a person makes when they mean something by it. I asked him where it came from. He said a barn teardown out past the county line, and he had no idea. He said, "You want it? It's 5. I paid the 5. I told myself it was pretty. I told my mother it was pretty. It sat on the windowsill in her kitchen for 2 days, and then I put it in my pocket. And after that, it was in my pocket every day. And I never once said out loud, not to her, not to my husband, not to myself, that I had gone looking for iron. I would have told you I don't believe in that. I would have meant it. The last thing I found was a name. I'd gone back through the county paper looking for anything about the creek, and in the summer of 1976, there's a woman named Alma Coyne who went missing in Ash Fork. 34 years old. Not from here originally. She'd married in. There are 3 short pieces about her over about a month, and then nothing ever again. Last seen walking toward the creek on a Sunday afternoon. Search ran 9 days. Body never recovered. Presumed drowned. That's the whole file. That's everything there is. But 2 of the 11 people I'd asked about the rule brought her up on their own, unprompted, when I mentioned the Bend. And neither of them said she drowned. Both of them said some version of, She was asking about it too. That's all I ever got. A name, a disappearance, and two people who connected her to the question rather than to the water. I should have stopped. I had a name and a 9-day search and a body that never came up. Instead, I looked at that and thought, she didn't know about the trees. I went in on a Tuesday in the 4th week at 2 in the afternoon in bright sun. I planned it. It was not a dare and not a dark night and not curiosity that got away from me. I chose the middle of a hot, clear day. I told nobody. I drove out and parked and walked down. There was not another person at the bend, which in July is unusual, and which I took at the time for luck. I had the nail in the pocket of my shorts. I remember checking for it on the walk down, patting the pocket the way you check for keys, and I remember thinking that was ridiculous. And I swam out past the second sycamore. Nothing happened. It was the most anticlimactic thing I've ever done. I swam past a tree. The water was cold and green and perfectly ordinary. I went maybe 40 feet past it, treading, feeling foolish and about 6 years old, and the creek went on around the curve exactly the way creeks do. There were birds, sun through the sycamores. I floated there a while and thought, with real relief and a little grief, it's nothing. 100 years of kids repeating something a kid made up. And then the water went still. Not the surface. The creek stopped moving. You don't notice a slow current until it isn't there, and then you notice it the way you'd notice your own heartbeat stopping. The pull against my legs went out. The leaves that had been drifting past me stopped drifting. The sound went, and a creek is never quiet. A creek is a constant low conversation over rock. The sound went out all at once, like a door closing on it. And then something took my ankle. It was a hand. It was a hand, and it closed around my ankle, and it was the size of a woman's hand, and I felt every finger. And it pulled me straight down. I got maybe one breath. Not a good one. I went under still trying to finish it, and then I was being taken down through water that had gone clear. That's the part nobody believes, that it went clear. Creek water you can see 4 feet through, and suddenly I could see 30. And the bed of that creek was a long way below me, and it was not a creek bed. It was arranged. It had order to it. It went down and back under the bank and around the curve, and it had the character of a place, and it was very old, and it was not empty. And I could see what had me. It was a woman. Or it had been at some point, that was a very long time ago, and there was still enough left to tell. Long dark shape of hair moving in water that had no current in it. A face that was mostly still a face. It was looking up at me while it pulled, and what was in that look was not rage. It was reproach. I have been a mother's daughter, and I am somebody's aunt, and I know that expression from the inside. And I am telling you that the thing at the bottom of that creek was looking at me the way a woman looks at a child who has done the one thing she was told not to do. Hurt, disappointed, certain it was owed better than this. It wasn't taking me because it wanted me. It was taking me because I had gone past the tree, and it had told me not to, and it had been telling me since I was 7 years old. I fought. I did nothing clever. I fought like anybody fights, poorly, and with everything, and mostly upward. I got my free heel into it twice, and the second time the grip slipped from my ankle to my calf, and I got maybe 4 feet of water back. And I turned in the water and I went for the tree. Not the bank, the tree. Because in the middle of drowning, the only clear thought I had was 9 nails, and I have thought about that a lot since. That when everything went, the thing that stayed was a fact I'd found on a Thursday morning and been so pleased about. I do not know how long that took. It could not have been more than 15 seconds. It has taken 4 years, and it is still taking. I got my hand on the trunk of the second sycamore. Underwater, about chest height on the upstream side, there's a knot in the bark the size of a fist. My palm went across it, and I felt the nail heads, and I got my fingers into that swelling, and I hauled, dragging myself up the trunk with something still holding my calf, and I felt the whole side of my shorts tear open along the seam. and the nail went out of my pocket into the water. It let go. Not gradually. It came off me the way a hand comes off a hot pan, all at once, and I felt the water move as something went away from me, fast and downward. And the creek started running again. The sound came back. The green came back. I came up 2 feet from the second sycamore with my arms locked around a tree, and I made a noise I have never made before or since, and I hung on that trunk and breathed for a very long time. Then I got myself along the trunk to the gravel and lay down on stones hot enough to burn, and I coughed creek water for 20 minutes. There was a ring of bruises around my calf, 5 of them. They lasted 11 days. I did not tell anybody for 2 years. I went back to the house and I told my mother I'd fallen on the rocks, and I sat at her kitchen table with wet hair and made conversation about her physical therapy. I finished the 6 weeks. Her knee healed. I went home. Nothing followed me. Whatever's in that creek is in that creek, and I believe it's been in that creek since before there was an ash fork. What I have instead is arithmetic. An iron nail is sitting in the bed of that pool about 8 feet from the second sycamore, where it went out of my pocket. It's been there 4 years. Iron in fresh water rusts. That's not folklore, that's chemistry. How fast depends on the water, the oxygen, the movement, the mineral content, and I have read more than any person needs to about it. A hand-forged square-cut nail in a cold, clear, moving mountain creek, 100 years maybe 150. It's a good nail. It was made by somebody who knew what they were doing. So there's a fence in that water. There always was. 9 in one tree, 4 in the other. Driven by somebody 140 years ago who understood exactly what they were dealing with and never wrote down a word of it. And now there's one more, on the bottom, past the line. I don't know that it's holding anything. I know that something had my leg and let go the instant that nail hit the water, and I know it hasn't taken a child since, and I know it hadn't taken one for 140 years before that either. So maybe I didn't do anything at all. Maybe the trees were always enough, and I just fell into the one place the fence had a gap. Wyatt is 12 now. He still swims at the bend when they visit my mother. He does not go past the second sycamore. Last summer, I heard him tell a smaller cousin, "Hey, not past the second one," in the same 5 words, on the same gravel, and I did not say a thing. My name is Claire Doyle, and I lived in Marrow, in Hollow County, for 14 months. Everybody in that town told me to be gone the second week of August. They told me pleasantly, about a dozen times, in the friendliest possible terms, and not one of them ever explained why. I chose to stay. When I got out on the Friday night with the car in a ditch and 4 broken ribs, and I have never been back. I moved to Marrow in March, for a job. I'm a physician assistant. The regional practice there had been trying to fill the position for 2 years, which should have told me something about the town, and instead told me only that I had leverage on salary. Marrow is about 900 people, which in Hollow County makes it substantial. A real main street, a grocery store, not just a gas station, a clinic, a school, 2 churches, a hardware store, and a diner called the Bluebird that opened at 6 and closed at 8 and was, as far as I could tell, where the entire town's social life actually happened. It was a good place. People were kind to me in the specific, effortful way small towns are kind to a newcomer they've decided to keep. Casseroles, invitations, a man I'd never met plowing my driveway in March without being asked and refusing money for it. I liked living there. There were stretches that spring when I thought I might stay for good. The first time I heard about the closure was in April, and it was so casual I didn't register it as information. I was at the Bluebird, and I mentioned to Arlene, who ran it, that I was thinking about scheduling a continuing ed course in August, and she said, "Not the second week." I said, "What?" And she said, "Second week of August? Everything's closed. You'll want to plan around it." I said, "Closed for what?" And she said, "Everybody's out that week," and refilled my coffee and went to another table. That was the whole exchange. I filed it as a fact about my new town, like learning the pharmacy shuts at 5, or that the water tastes like iron in the spring. Over the next few months, I heard it maybe a dozen more times, always in that register. Not the second week of August. That's closure week. Nothing will be open. You'll be gone that week too, I expect. Nobody ever explained it, and I never asked, because it did not once occur to me that there was anything to explain. Towns have weeks where everything shuts. Whole countries do. The French take August. And when people said you'll be gone that week too, I heard a pleasantry. Small talk. The kind of thing people say to fill a gap. It was the only warning I was ever going to get. Repeated about a dozen times, in the friendliest possible terms, by people who genuinely believed they had told me something. I didn't leave because I had nowhere to go, and it hadn't occurred to me that I was supposed to. My mother was 2 states away, and we aren't close. I'd been in Marrow 5 months and hadn't built the kind of friendships where you get invited along. I had a rented house with a porch, a stack of books, and the first real stretch of unstructured time I'd had in 3 years. I told Arlene, on the Friday before, that I was looking forward to a quiet week at home. She stopped wiping the counter. That's the closest anyone came. Arlene stopped and looked at me, and something happened in her face. She was assembling a sentence. I watched her do it. She got as far as opening her mouth. And then she said, "Well, it's real quiet," and went back to the counter. That's what she had. I've thought about being angry at her, and I can't get there, because I've come to believe Arlene did not have the words. Not that she withheld them. The sentence she was reaching for did not exist in her, the way it did not exist in anybody in that town. And what came out instead was the one true thing she did have. It's real quiet. 2. Marrow closed on a Saturday night. I don't mean businesses locked their doors. I mean the town emptied. I sat on my porch that evening and watched 900 people leave. Not in a panic, not in a convoy, just the ordinary staggered departure of everybody in a place doing an ordinary thing on the same day. Loaded cars, kids in back seats, people locking up and pulling out and waving to each other. Several of them waved to me. I waved back. By full dark, Main Street was empty. By Sunday morning, so was everything else. I drove the whole town Sunday afternoon just to see it, the way you'd walk through your office building on a weekend. 900 people gone, and their houses left completely normal. Curtains open, porch chairs out, a bicycle on its side in a yard. Nothing boarded, nothing packed away. The town looked like it expected to be back Monday. The Bluebird had a handwritten sign in the window. Closed. See you the 18th. I remember thinking it was going to be a great week. Monday was fine. Genuinely. I slept until 9. I read on the porch. The silence was enormous and lovely. No traffic, no lawnmowers, nothing but insects and the occasional bird. I made too much coffee and drank all of it and got through half the boxes in the spare room. Monday was one of the more pleasant days of that year. Tuesday is when I noticed the first thing. And I noticed it because I'm the kind of person who notices small mechanical facts. The traffic light at the crossroads was cycling. Marrow had one light. It ran a normal cycle during the day and blinked yellow after 10. Tuesday afternoon, I drove up to it and sat there, alone, no other vehicle in the town, and watched it run a full standard cycle. Green, yellow, red, hold, green. Which isn't strange. Traffic lights are automated. That's the least strange thing in the world. Except I'd sat at that light every workday for 5 months, and it was demand actuated on the side street. There's a sensor loop. If nothing is waiting on the cross street, the main road just stays green. It was running the full cycle, stopping the main road, holding for 90 seconds for a cross street with nothing on it. Over and over. All week. After that, I couldn't stop cataloging, and once I started, Marrow was full of it. The Beecham house on 3rd had its lawn mowed Wednesday. I'm certain of the day because I'd walked past Tuesday evening and it was shaggy. Genuinely overdue, the kind of grass a man would be embarrassed about. And Wednesday morning, it was cut. Cleanly. Clippings raked. In a town with nobody in it. The Methodist church was unlocked Wednesday afternoon and locked Thursday morning. I checked both times, on foot, by hand. I did not go in. The flag at the school went up. Not Monday, Thursday, at some point between my morning walk and my evening one. Up the pole properly, not tangled. And Wednesday night, the garbage went out. Thursday is collection day in Marrow. Wednesday evening, cans at the curb up and down every street. Thursday afternoon, empty cans back against the houses. I never heard a truck. I was awake. I was, by Thursday, extremely awake. Nothing menaced me. For the first 4 days, I was never threatened, never chased, never watched in any way I could point to. I never saw a figure. I never heard footsteps outside the house. There was no presence in my bedroom at 3 in the morning. What there was, instead, was administration. The town was being run. Efficiently, invisibly, on schedule, by something that had the whole place to itself and a list of things that needed doing. Lawns, flags, doors, lights, refuse. The ordinary maintenance of a small town, performed exactly, in an empty town, for nobody. And I was in the way. I was not a target. I was an obstruction. A person standing in a room while somebody tries to sweep it. The sweeping did not stop, and did not acknowledge me, and very much wanted me to not be there. I could have lived with that. If it had stayed at that, I think I would have finished the week frightened and fascinated, and I would probably still be living in that house. Then on Thursday, it started coming down my street. I worked out the route on Thursday evening, sitting on my kitchen floor with a county plat map I'd taken off the wall of the practice, because by then I was not sleeping and I had to do something with my hands. The lawns were the thing I could track. Grass is dated. You can look at a cut lawn and know within about a day when it happened, and I'd been walking that town for 5 days. 3rd Street had been done Wednesday. 3rd connects to Vance at the north end. Vance had been done, I was almost certain, Wednesday night or early Thursday, because I'd noticed it Thursday morning without noticing that I'd noticed it. And Vance runs into Pell. And Pell is my street. I sat on that floor with a pencil, and I traced it. And it wasn't random, and it wasn't proximity. It was a route. It went up one street and down the next, the way a mail carrier works, the way a meter reader works, the way anything works when it has a list and a town and all the time in the world. It had started on the west side Sunday night, and it had been working east all week. I counted the houses left on Pell before mine. 11. Friday morning, my gutters were clear. They had been full. Not neglected full, but a season's worth of maple seed and grit that I'd been intending to deal with. And Friday morning I came out onto the porch with my coffee, and the gutters were clean, and there was a small, neat pile of debris at the corner of the house, where somebody had raked it up and left it to be dealt with. Somebody had done a chore at my house. On its face, that's a kindness. A house being maintained is a good thing. For 5 days I had been an obstruction, something in the way of the work. And that morning, standing on my own porch with a cup of coffee, I understood that I had stopped being in the way of the work. I had become part of it. I was on the list. I did not leave immediately. I told myself it was one more day. I told myself the town came back Saturday night, and it was Friday morning, and I had gotten this far. I told myself that leaving meant driving 40 minutes to the county road in a car I didn't entirely trust and checking into a motel I'd have to pay for, and that nothing had actually happened to me. And underneath all of that, which I can only see now, I did not want to be the woman who ran. I liked that town. I had been kept awake for 5 days by lawn maintenance, and some part of me was still managing how I'd sound describing it. So I stayed through Friday, and I watched the street. 6 houses by noon. I could see the cut grass from my porch, working up the block toward me in daylight, and I never once saw it happen. I would look away and look back, and another lawn would be done. 4 by 3 in the afternoon, 2 by 6. The house next door was cut at about 8:15 in the dusk, while I stood at my kitchen window and watched, and I did not see a single thing occur. The grass was long, and then I blinked, and it was short, and there was a smell of cut grass coming through the screen so strong it was like standing in a field. There was no mower. There was no sound. There was nobody on that lawn. There was just the smell of it coming through my window, at 8:15 at night. I left at 8:40. That was not panic. Panic would have been better. Panic is fast. What I did was stand in my kitchen for 25 minutes doing arithmetic while the smell of cut grass came through the screen. The route was a route. It had done 11 houses on my street in about 14 hours, working east, and mine was next. Whatever it was going to do at my house, it was going to do it in the ordinary course of the work, on schedule, the way it had done the church door and the flag and the garbage. And Saturday afternoon the town would come back, and everybody in it would drive past a house they knew had somebody in it, and nobody would say a word about what they found or didn't. So I got my keys. I did not pack. I took my bag and my laptop and the plat map off the kitchen floor, and I got in the car and I drove. That was the choice. That's the only thing in this entire story I did on purpose. I got 25 minutes of deciding, and I used them, and I nearly used too many. The county road out of Marrow runs 11 miles northeast to the state route, and it is a bad road in the daylight. 2 lanes, no shoulder, a ditch on the right and a rock cut on the left, and switchbacks through the gap that a local takes at 40 and a stranger takes at 25. I took them faster than I should have, not recklessly. I was not being chased. There were no headlights behind me and nothing on the road and nothing in the mirror all the way out. I was driving fast because I had done the arithmetic and I had spent too long on it. I lost it on the third curve, about 4 miles out. The back end came around on gravel at the edge of the pavement, and I overcorrected the way everybody overcorrects, and the car went off the right side and down the embankment into the ditch and stopped hard against the base of a hickory. I was conscious the whole time. The airbag went. My chest hit the belt and the wheel, and I felt something go. That specific, unmistakable sensation of ribs failing, which I had explained to patients for 11 years and had never once experienced. 4 ribs, as it turned out, and a pulmonary contusion, a bruise on the lung itself. That's what put me in the hospital for 3 days, rather than the emergency room for 4 hours. There's a particular kind of breathing you do with broken ribs, very shallow, very careful, and it is exhausting in a way I had never appreciated. I had no signal. I sat in that car at the bottom of an embankment, in the dark, 4 miles from a town, with nobody in it, breathing in inches. I got out. It took a while, and I walked the remaining 7 miles to the state route, on a bad ankle, holding my own ribs, and got picked up at about 2 in the morning by a man hauling chicken feed who took one look at me and drove me straight to the county hospital in Cutchin without asking me a single question. I have never gotten his name. If he ever hears this, thank you. Arlene came to see me on the Monday. Marrow had come back Saturday night, and somebody had told somebody, the way it works in a place like that. And Monday morning she was in the doorway of my hospital room with a foil-covered dish, which is the most Marrow thing that has ever happened to me. She sat down. She looked at the tape on my chest and at the ankle, and she did not ask me what happened. She said, "You stayed." Not a question. I said yes. And Arlene put the dish on the tray table and sat back and said, "Oh, honey, nobody told you to go?" I said everybody told me. Everybody told me for 4 months. Nobody once told me why. And Arlene looked at her hands for a while. Then she said, "We don't know why either, sugar. We just know we go." She told me the rest slowly and in pieces. She was not confessing. She did not have the manner of a woman handing over a secret. She had the manner of a woman going through a drawer, looking for something she was fairly sure was in there. She said Marrow used to have a fair. 2nd week of August, every year, same field, going back before her mother was born. The Marrow Agricultural Exhibition. Livestock, produce, a midway in the later years. She said it like it was nothing, like telling me the hardware store used to be a feed store. I asked when it stopped. She said 57. She knew the year without pausing, which I noticed. I asked why, and Arlene said there was some argument about the field. And then, after a second, my mother never would say more than that. She'd get a look. I asked what happened after, and she said, "That's when the week started." Same week. The exact 2 weeks the fair used to run, one of them kept, and the town going away for it instead of gathering for it. I asked, and I was on a lot of medication and I asked it badly. I asked her what she thought was in Marrow that week. And Arlene said, I don't think about it. Not defensively, not sharply. She said it the way you'd say, I don't eat shellfish. A fact about herself she'd settled a long time ago. Then she said the thing I've kept. My mother told me you go, and you come back Sunday, and you don't ask. And I've done that 51 times. She smoothed the foil on the dish. You get used to the going. It's a nice week, mostly. We see my sister. I drove to Ashfort 3 weeks later, with my ribs still taped because I could not leave it alone. 15 miles and a ridge away. I had never once been there in 14 months of living in Marrow, and that is a strange fact I only noticed afterward. Ashfort still has its fair. Second and third weeks of July, same field since 1911. I stood at the edge of a hayfield on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon and watched 400 people be extremely happy. Kids on rides, a livestock barn, somebody's terrible band, a woman selling pie by the slice off a card table, and a line for it. It was the most ordinary thing I have ever seen, and I stood there for an hour and could not make myself leave. And I talked to a woman at the Ash Fork diner afterward, and I said I've been living over in Marrow, and she said, pleasantly, no edge in it at all. They don't do anything over there anymore, do they? I said, what do you mean? And she said, my mother used to say, Marrow let theirs go. She topped off my coffee. That's all I know. She'd say it like it explained something. I moved out that autumn. I live in Winston-Salem now. Nothing followed me. Whatever is in Hollow County is in Hollow County, and it stayed there. Here's what I think, and it's a construction, not a discovery, and nobody in either town ever told me any of it. I don't think those towns are haunted. I think they're occupied. That there's something in that county that has been there longer than either of them, and it isn't going anywhere. And what it wants is a place, and something to do in it. Ashfort gives it a fair. 2 weeks a year, same field, same dates, 114 years without a single interruption. 400 people in a hayfield eating pie and handing it a schedule to keep. Marrow used to do the same, and in 1957 some men had an argument about a field and cancelled it. And I don't know what happened next, because nobody in Marrow knows and the paper stopped printing in '58. What I know is that Marrow does not have a fair anymore and has not tried to have one in 68 years, and what it has instead is 1 week where 900 people hand over the entire town, every street, every house, the traffic light and the garbage and the flag on the school pole, and go somewhere else while it has the run of the place. That isn't a tradition. That's what's left after you break one. I think about Arlene more than anything else about that town. 51 years of packing a car in the second week of August and driving somewhere and coming back on a Sunday and unlocking the Bluebird and changing the sign, without ever once being told what she was doing or why. And she'll do it every year until she dies, and she'll teach it to whoever takes the Bluebird after her exactly the way it was taught to her, as a fact about the calendar. Second week of August, everything's closed. I used to think that was ignorance. It isn't. The not knowing is the job. If Arlene knew what she was doing, she would have to decide whether to keep doing it. And in that town, that decision has already been made wrong once, by men arguing about a field. And Marrow has been paying the difference for 68 years. If you move somewhere small, and people tell you a thing about the calendar, a week, a date, a night, something everybody does and nobody explains, and they tell you pleasantly, and they tell you more than once, and every single time it sounds like small talk. That is not small talk. That's the whole warning. That is the entire alarm system, and it is built out of pleasantries, because that is the only shape a warning can take in a place where nobody knows what they're warning you about. They told me 12 times. Every one of them thought they'd told me. That's where we'll leave it tonight. If these stories kept you company, leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel find the people who'd want to hear it. Subscribe if you'd like to come along on the next trip out into Hollow County. There's a new one waiting every week. And if you grew up somewhere small, if there's a rule you've kept since you were 7 that nobody ever explained, a week on the calendar that everybody honors and nobody discusses, a place in your hometown that people just don't go, we'd like to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. We may tell it here someday. Until then, remember, every small town has its rules, and the ones nobody can explain are the ones that have been working the longest.